You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. He called himself a Christian philanthropist. He said he was saving children, and said he was preying on them. For nearly a decade, Richard Huckle moved through some of Southeast Asia's poorest neighborhoods, armed with a camera, a Bible, and a chilling secret. Behind the smiles and charity work was one of the most prolific child predators the world had ever seen. Over 200 victims, dozens of handwritten journals, and a scorecard ranking the children he abused. But the question is, how did he get away with it for so long? And who finally stopped him? This is the horrifying true story of Richard Huckle, the monster who hid in plain sight. Please be advised, this episode contains content that may be upsetting to some listeners. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Chapter 1. The Man No One Suspected. Richard Huckle grew up in Kent, England, a seemingly quiet middle-class area where neighbors knew each other by name and little ever went wrong. To most who knew him, Richard was a polite, soft-spoken young man. He attended church, volunteered in his community, and eventually pursued photography. Nothing about him stood out as dangerous or predatory. But behind his quiet demeanor was a darkness that would only come to light after years of unchecked exploitation. In 2005, at just 19 years old, Huckle took what seemed like a noble path. He traveled to Southeast Asia, presenting himself as a devout Christian, offering his services to impoverished communities. He began teaching English, volunteering at local schools, and working with charities in Malaysia, mostly in low-income neighborhoods. But this was no mission of goodwill. Instead, it was a calculated move to gain unrestricted access to vulnerable children. With a camera always at his side, Richard meticulously documented his so-called adventures. And over time, he developed a horrifying secret life that remained invisible to even those closest to him, a secret he shared only in the darkest corners of the internet. Chapter 2. A Predator in Disguise. In Malaysia, Huckle built trust quickly. He learned the language, participated in religious events, and even became a godparent to local children. His whiteness, his missionary identity, and his seemingly selfless work gave him credibility in poor communities. No one questioned his intentions, and this allowed him to operate with near total freedom. But Richard Huckle's true purpose was exploitation. Over nearly a decade, he sexually abused dozens of children, most of them between the ages of 6 months and 12 years old. He targeted children from Christian and Muslim families alike, particularly those whose parents were too poor to supervise them regularly. He used gifts, money, and promises of education to gain access to his victims, often befriending entire families to reach younger siblings. He kept journals, wrote blog entries on the dark web, and uploaded photos and videos of his crimes to child abuse forums. In these online spaces, he became a minor celebrity among pedophiles, even writing a guidebook he titled Pedophiles and Poverty, Child-Loving Guide. It was as if he viewed himself not just as a predator, but as a mentor to others. Despite the sheer number of offenses, Huckle remained untouched by law enforcement for years. No parents reported him. No teachers raised alarms. His ability to blend in, along with the economic vulnerabilities of his victims' families, gave him what felt like immunity, until one day, someone noticed. Chapter 3. Operation Arrow and the Dark Web Sting. In 2014, Australian authorities took down a dark website known as the Love Zone. a notorious forum for child sex abuse content. They passed the data to British investigators at the National Crime Agency, triggering what would become Operation Arrow, a secret investigation into some of the most vile child abusers connected to the forum. Among the data was a disturbing wealth of information pointing toward a British man living in Malaysia. One particular username, Wicked Neo, stood out. The user had uploaded thousands of images, written confessional posts, and even boasted about not being caught. With careful analysis, investigators matched details in the photos, including GPS metadata, identifiable landmarks, and glimpses of passports, to Richard Huckle. The NCA spent months building a case, secretly tracking Huckle's movements and gathering more evidence. But rather than alert Malaysian authorities, they made a strategic decision: wait for him to return to the UK. In December 2014, during a Christmas visit home, Huckle landed at Gatwick Airport and walked straight into the arms of British police. Their agents seized his laptop. What they found was beyond horrific: more than 20,000 images and videos of child abuse, meticulously cataloged with victim names, ages, and disturbing notes. Many files were encrypted, but even the accessible ones were enough to expose a monstrous decade-long rampage. Chapter 4: The Trial That Shook the Nation. In June 2016, Richard Huckle stood trial at the Old Bailey, facing 91 charges of sexual offenses against children. He pleaded guilty to 71 of them, covering a staggering range of abuse, rape, sexual assault, and indecent images involving children as young as 6 months old. The case left the UK in shock, not just because of the scale of the abuse, but because of how easily it had gone undetected for so long. The courtroom heard how Huckle had created an Excel spreadsheet grading his victims, scoring them based on how easy they were to manipulate. He wrote that raping a 3-year-old was easier than producing his own music. He even expressed frustration that he couldn't open a crowdfunding page to support his child abuse guidebook. The judge, Peter Rook QC, called Huckle's actions one of the most sexually prolific offenses ever prosecuted in this country. He was handed 22 life sentences, with a minimum term of 25 years, meaning he could potentially be released in his 50s. The sentencing, while severe, left many questioning whether justice had truly been served. How could someone responsible for so much devastation face the possibility of release? Outside the court, victims' advocates called for harsher measures and greater international cooperation in child protection. Malaysia, in particular, faced national outrage for failing to catch a predator operating so openly in its midst. For many, the wounds caused by Huckle would never heal, and for some, justice would take an even darker turn. Chapter 5: The Lives He Destroyed. The true impact of Huckle's crimes wasn't captured in court transcripts or headlines. It was seen in the broken families, traumatized children, and communities left reeling from betrayal. In the poor neighborhoods of Kuala Lumpur and Penang, where Huckle operated most frequently, shame and stigma silenced many victims. Some parents blamed themselves. Others refused to believe what had happened. Mental health professionals who worked with victims described lifelong trauma, night terrors, trust issues, suicidal ideation, and physical health complications. Children who had once looked up to Huckle as a teacher or a friend now associated education and religion with violation. Some survivors had to be relocated for safety or privacy, while others simply withdrew from society. To make matters worse, legal limitations in Malaysia meant that most of Huckle's victims would never see their abuser face a Malaysian court. Because he was arrested in the UK and all evidence was processed there, the Malaysian government struggled to build its own legal case. Some felt he had escaped true accountability by not having to face his victims in the country where his crimes occurred. The scars ran deep, not just on individuals, but on entire systems. Huckle had exposed a gap in international child protection laws, showing how abusers could exploit poverty, religion, and raced to commit horrific crimes without consequence. Chapter 6: A Death Behind Bars. On October 13th, 2019, just 3 years into his prison sentence, Richard Huckle was found dead in his cell at Full Sutton Prison in Yorkshire. He had been stabbed and strangled with a guitar string. The man responsible, Paul Fitzgerald, a fellow inmate, later admitted to torturing Huckle over several hours. Fitzgerald said it was a poetic justice, calling it a war against pedophiles. In court, Fitzgerald claimed he wanted Huckle to feel what his victims felt. He had prepared the murder in advance, arming himself with homemade weapons. Prison staff found Huckle tied up and mutilated, with clear signs of prolonged suffering. While some saw Fitzgerald's actions as brutal, others considered them a form of retribution. Public reaction to Huckle's death was mixed, ranging from relief to disgust to unease. Though many agreed that Huckle was a monster, his death raised questions about prison safety, inmate-on-inmate violence, and the ethics of vigilante justice behind bars. The British government acknowledged that Huckle's case and his death highlighted deep flaws in both international justice and the penal system. But for the families of his victims, the news brought no closure. No amount of punishment could undo the damage. Huckle's crimes had altered the course of dozens of lives forever. Chapter 7: A Chilling Legacy. Richard Huckle's case forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths. That child predators don't always hide in the shadows, that exploitation can happen under the guise of charity, and that poverty often leaves the most vulnerable completely unprotected. He had built his image on lies, a missionary, a teacher, a friend, and used it. Richard Huckle revealed terrifying truths, not just about one man, but about the systems that allowed him to operate so freely. He wasn't a hacker or a criminal mastermind. He was a volunteer, a traveler, a man with a camera and a false smile. And yet, for years, he committed atrocities under the guise of charity. Churches welcomed him, families trusted him, online communities celebrated him, all while he destroyed lives behind closed doors. The UK government faced criticism for not acting sooner. Malaysia, too, was forced to confront difficult questions about child protection and the presence of foreign volunteers in vulnerable communities. Since the case broke, both nations have introduced reforms and increased scrutiny on foreign aid workers. But critics say it's not enough. Thank you for joining us in this unsettling journey through the chilling case of Richard Huckle. His story serves as a dark reminder of how predators can disguise themselves in plain sight and the profound damage they can inflict. If you found this story important, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on more true crime cases. Your support helps raise awareness about the dangers we might not always see. If you have thoughts or opinions about this case, leave them in the comments below. We always appreciate hearing from you. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, justice for the victims is a fight we all need to be part of. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.